We have we've reached our fire marshal max, so the doors are closed. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Aaron Presnell. I'm the president of the Jefferson Institute in Washington, D.C. I am delighted to see you all here today. It's one of the best rooms in the building, and we've got an amazing panel here to talk together with us. I don't want to spend time on long bios. You've got them. We have Ms. Caroline Baxter, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Force Education Training at OSD, Dr. Celeste Gventer, President of the Defense Security Cooperation University, Major General Sergei Salkutsan, who's the Ukraine military representative to NATO, and we're especially grateful for having you here. I know that you have a lot on your plate right now, and we're grateful for your time. Brigadier General Rolf Wagner, Deputy Director of the George C. Marshall Center, Rear Admiral Peter Vaisley, Deputy Director, Joint Training, Joint Staff, J7, and Major General Curtis Buzzard, Commander, U.S. Army Maneuver Center of Excellence and Fort Moore. The title here is Train While You Fight, and I want to acknowledge and give credit to that idea that originally surfaced at Itsec last year when Ms. Baxter brought it up, observing that the experience in Ukraine shows us that training is not just to prepare for the fight, but to sustain the fight. Right? And so we're here to talk about Ukraine as a reference point, but mainly looking to the future. Right? So I don't want to dwell on Ukraine in the moment. I want us to look forward. What is the, how do we, together as nations and as a community, build the systems and processes, relationships that we need to train together effectively in the modern context to prepare for the fight and, if necessary, while we fight. And I'll emphasize the we. I want to give each of our distinguished visitors here, our distinguished guests, a chance to do opening remarks. We will then have some time for Q&A, and we'll wrap up with about a minute each for you for closing remarks, and I'll give the final words to Major General Salkutsan. I want to, at the same time, also just none of these kinds of things happen organically. It doesn't fall from the sky. I want to really acknowledge Dr. Jenny McArdle and Dr. Say Schatz, who helped me get this panel started, and Ms. Baxter for championing the panel and helping making all the various pieces come together so that we could be here together today. So with that, I want to get out of the way and let you get to the folks who you're really here to see. Ms. Baxter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Presnell. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Wow. All right, we had our Wheaties. Let me start by throwing out a hypothesis. Whereas prior revolutions in training have focused on new approaches to combined arms and integrated technologies, those were not nearly as complex as what we are on the cusp of demanding from the joint force. To train while we fight presents a step change in difficulty that, yes, requires much from technology and combined arms, but more so requires a fundamental shift, a true revolution in our use of time, human cognition, and human agency. The challenges we face around the globe demand that we meet the moment. By the very definition of the term, a pacing challenge is fluid, dynamic, and reactive. In the back of our minds, a pacing challenge feels some days to be just barely behind our own capabilities and other days just ahead. As I stated yesterday in the senior leader panel, it would be folly to assume that in an active conflict, this dynamic would shift such that the pacing challenge would remain a static state of proficiency, allowing us continuous and comfortable overmatch. On the contrary, we will need to have the ability to learn and adapt in a crisis. And this would be no ordinary crisis. Let's make no mistake about the horrors a hot war with a large, exquisitely armed, relentlessly trained, nuclear-armed adversary would unleash. Yesterday, I discussed what my office, in concert with our colleagues across DoD, is doing to bolster our training infrastructure and ready our service members for the future fight, notably by strengthening governance, building realistic and immersive environments, and creating an integrated and interoperable capability. Today, I want to talk about what a shift towards preparing them to train while they fight will mean. So let's start by looking at the complementarity between education and training and how this revolution in training will affect both. Military education provides the cognitive reps and sets that service members require to understand and address known and unknown national security issues. Our military education institutions are committed to instilling the knowledge and habits of mind that our forces need to think critically and creatively. They're injecting emerging threats like climate change into curricula and using lessons learned from recent conflicts and events to buttress enduring content on strategy, history, and leadership. They're also providing students with the frameworks and approaches to thrive in ambiguity. Military training and exercises, on the other hand, provide the physical reps and sets that warfighters need to develop muscle memory and gain valuable experience. Ensuring our training capabilities keep pace with our operating environment ensures the quality, as measured by relevance and realism, of our training. But in our zeal to ever perfect training quality, we cannot forget about training timing. As we think about what training for the fight and while we fight means, one adjustment that will need to be made is to the axiom that we educate for uncertainty and we train for certainty. What we infer by that axiom is that because the future is unknowable, our education focuses on how to use those 6 inches between the ears. That preparation for an uncertain future depends less on what you know than how you think. By contrast, training for certainty rests on the immutability that each individual member of the armed forces must be qualified on the weapon systems that they are there to use. But there's a missing piece. Yes, it may be certain that I'm going to have to use my rifle, but when, why, against whom, and alongside what other friendly capability is not. But moreover, neither is it certain what will happen after that, to include how the enemy will react, adapt, and outpace me in the moment. Training while we fight demands we allow a little bit more uncertainty into the mix, emphasizing critical thinking in conflict to unleash spur-of-the-moment ingenuity about how to marry capabilities together that have not been tested before. This then triggers another adjustment that must be made in order to enable training during the fight, not presuming that all training must or even can happen before conflict starts. To truly shift the paradigm, training before the fight remains essential, but it is no longer deemed as sufficient or spoken about in terms of a fixed amount of time, after which you're as ready as you'll ever be. This also forces an adjustment to the content of the training to include simulating an all-domain, adaptive, high-tempo battle space. This is not force-on-force exercises. This is systems-on-systems warfare. To prepare the joint force for warfare that will demand they retrain in real time, pre-conflict training demands we prepare for operations without communications to higher headquarters and get people used to injecting lessons learned on the battlefield to generate new systems configurations in an active conflict. All of this means clarifying our requirements for and integration of the weapon systems we'll need for the future fight. DoD is using our new governance structure and data collection processes to identify critical gaps and foster the acquisition, development, and delivery of joint, not just service-specific solutions. But the solutions themselves must be evaluated with an eye towards how people learn especially in new environments under extremely stressful conditions. We cannot allow the complexity of our weapons to exacerbate the complexity of the conflict. We can and should, however, allow this complexity to drive creativity. We're fortunate at DoD to have tremendous leadership support for this change and many other training improvements. That said, the only way we'll be able to accomplish this is by, with, and through the services and combatant commands, our allies and partners, our industry colleagues, and other stakeholders. So let me conclude by addressing each in turn. To the services and the combatant commands, you have been incredible partners in our efforts to build the infrastructure and collect the data required to inform decisions about training solutions. Please continue to collaborate with my office and help us underscore the importance of these activities and advocate for them across the department. I want to continue to work together to determine how we can account for real-time, on-the-ground training in our military strategies and campaign plans. To our allies and partners, I've said this before, I'll say this again, the U.S. does not fight alone. We never have and we never will. As we evolve and advance and enhance our training capabilities, please share your needs and capabilities with us so that we can develop shared training requirements and shared interoperable TTPs, systems, and platforms. Together, we can eliminate long-standing barriers, including an imperfect information environment, and establish a coalition force that can operate seamlessly in a multi-domain environment and demonstrate overmatched capabilities to deter our adversaries. And to industry, we recognize and appreciate your efforts to build training capabilities that match current conflicts and urge you to continue collaborating with DoD project managers to experiment and field timely solutions to enable us to keep pace with shifting requirements. But at the same time, as we think more broadly about training and what might be needed on the battlefield, we ask that you also consider whether these solutions are too complicated to learn and leverage in stride. A hallmark of the new training normal must be interoperable weapon systems that we can train on easily and jointly. Before I wrap up my remarks, I want to foot stomp a point that Dr. Presnell and I have discussed a lot, which is that we're quickly approaching the 75th anniversary of NATO. Training is an enabler of the robust cooperation and collective defense that NATO seeks to promote. And we in the department, on the panel in the audience, and across the training community have an opportunity to leverage this natural point of integration by sharing information, coordinating training requirements, and developing interoperable and easy-to-use systems. And I hope that you'll join me and my office in taking advantage of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Gravencher.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here today. It's great to see you all. It's a pleasure to be part of such a distinguished panel, and I'm grateful to Dr. Presnell and Dasdy Baxter for inviting me here today. So I have the rather august title as president of the Defense Security Cooperation University. We're part of the Defense Security Cooperation Agency, so allies and partners is our business. But of course, like all DoD academic institutions, we promote academic freedom among our faculty and urge them to think and research. So today, I'm speaking for myself, and my views don't represent those of the department or DSCA. So a key part of my job is to prepare the security cooperation workforce for the era that we're entering. As many of you may know, for a long time, the United States didn't take this task very seriously, didn't think security cooperation was all that important or something worth investing in. That's clearly changed. But the real question is whether we're going to be able to make the adjustments fast enough. I have a team examining the lessons learned in security cooperation from Ukraine right now, and we're working hard to identify what those are and how we can include them in our curriculum. But what I'll tell you is one of the things that we've learned is how much the Ukraine situation has exposed some of the weaknesses in the systems and processes that we have today, and we need to work hard to rectify them quickly. Let me suggest that I think we're in a time of profound crisis. I am a historian, full disclosure, but from a Michael Crichton book, there's a great quote about not knowing anything about history. It's like being a leaf and not knowing you're part of a tree. So history is quite important, I believe, if we're to understand who we really are and where we are and why we are there. There are 3 nuclear-armed hostile states hostile to the United States today: Russia, China, North Korea. We don't really know how close Iran, maybe I don't, to having their own nuclear capability soon enough. The climate crisis doesn't appear to be getting any better, and who knows what economic challenges may lie ahead. Future historians may look back on this era as a kind of pre-war period. So my question to you all is, if that's the case, are we acting like people in a pre-war period? Are we ready to confront the challenges that we face? And if not, can we get ready quickly enough? In the past, the United States had the luxury of taking time to get itself ready. It's not clear we have that much time this go-around. So let me expand on these questions just a little bit and then offer what I think are some solutions. Why are we not acting like people in a pre-war period? Probably lots of reasons, but let me offer one that calls upon my recent experience in government. Smart, pragmatic, innovative, and problem solvers get ground down in the US government. It may be the case in our international organizations as well. I know it's quite easy to just condemn sclerotic bureaucracy, but the truth is it's quite hard to be innovative and offer solutions that are radical these days. I think there tends to be not a great sense of urgency among large portions of the bureaucracy, and maybe a satisfaction with vagueness, abstractions, pronouncements, and ideas with no concrete plans associated with them. Americans used to be known for being problem-solving and forward-leaning, but maybe those skills and instincts have atrophied to a large degree, as my friend and mentor Philip Zelikow writes in a forthcoming Foreign Affairs essay. So one reason I believe we are unready to confront this era is that we are not getting ready, or we're not getting ready fast enough. In the early days of the Cold War, the strategic imperative quickly became scientific and technological predominance. But the US government made massive investments not only in stuff, but in education and training of Americans to compete. Given the outcome of the Cold War, those investments seem to have paid off. The proposition I'd like to pose to you today is that we face a new era of intellectual imperatives, one in which we once again face a deficit in intellectual capital that we need to rapidly redress. That new imperative is to deepen our understanding of what is needed to strengthen our relationships with allies and partners, how we provide the most effective security assistance, and what changes in our own approaches are necessary to be successful in this highly dynamic and dangerous security environment. As everyone who knows me can attest, and I'll wrap up with this, if you give me more than 5 minutes, and they said 5 to 8, so they gave me more than 5, I will bring up the 1940 secret memoir of Marc Bloch, a French historian, soldier, veteran of the First World War, and leader of the French resistance, who was executed by the Nazis in 1944. In his memoir, Strange Defeat, he sought to leave behind his diagnosis of why the supposedly indomitable French army was so easily defeated in 1940, a scene he watched from the front lines. In Strange Defeat, he explains, "Our soldiers were defeated and to some extent let themselves be too easily defeated, principally because their minds functioned far too sluggishly. The Germans," he wrote, "relied on action and improvisation. We, on the other hand, believed in doing nothing and behaving as we had always behaved." He concludes, in other words, the German triumph was essentially a triumph of intellect. This, it seems to me, are the wages of complacency, and it is a warning we ignore at our peril. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. General Salkitson.
Good morning. I would like to start my briefing with words of thanks from all Ukrainian people to all our friends, partners, allies from Europe, from New Zealand, from Australia, from Japan, from South Korea, and from another places around the world for significant support of Ukraine from the beginning of this full-scale aggression, Russian aggression against Ukraine. Also, I would like to say special thanks to the United States of America for absolutely significant leadership in supporting Ukraine at this hard period of time. I think one of the absolutely brilliant example of geopolitical leadership, US geopolitical leadership, was the decision to create a Rammstein coalition, which right now included approximately 50 countries, various countries which supporting us with delivering of weapons, materials, and so on and so forth. But the main aspect of this coalition is the start discussions regarding the future structure of armed forces of Ukraine. We're speaking about new capability coalitions, like air defense coalition, tanks coalition, jets coalition, IT coalition, demining coalition, and I believe we will speak about another one coalition in the framework of development of another level of defense forces of Ukraine. And of course, the huge part of international support is military education and training as a basis for redevelopment of all system and all architecture of professional military education and training in Ukraine. As for military education, fortunately, in this year, we have finished adaptation of our concept of transformation of the system of military education. Unfortunately, we have lost so many time for discussion what system we need. But during war period of time, our parliament have adopted a new concept of the transformation of the system of military education. And I would say that this concept based on Western understanding of the system of military education. It's based on Western values. And this is our biggest victory. This concept was developed in close relations with the NATO D program and our partners from United States, from Scandinavian countries, from Baltic countries, and from Poland, of course. I would say about training. According to the data of our general staff, 1 month ago we have finished training of 100,000 servicemen under umbrella of international assisted missions. First of all, UMAM. Secondly, UK leading Interflex and US leading SAGU. 100,000 personnel. This training included basic training, platform or specialist training, collective training, and leadership training. And of course, this type of cooperation during the war, more than only training of our specialists. It's about sharing experience. This is about development of trust. This is about development of future, our common resilience and our common system of security and defense. At the same time, if you ask me, is 100,000 it's enough? I would say no, it's not enough. It's not enough because Russia is continuing aggressive war against Ukraine. The initial objective of Russian Federation still unchanged. It's elimination of statehood of Ukraine. Russia trying to redevelop Russian society, defense industry, and rescaling this war into war of attrition. Russia has developed a huge joint forces on the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine, which include 7 groups of troops. Among the northern part of Ukraine, they additionally has developed 3 groups of troops on the territory of Russian Federation in Belgorod, Bryansk, and Kursk Oblast. Totally, it's approximately 450,000 personnel, approximately 9,000 of pieces of heavy weapon, 360 jets, 315 helicopters, 45 complexes of short-range ballistic missiles, approximately 20 strategic bombers, which on daily basis using as a platform for launching missile strikes against civilian object and military object across all territory of Ukraine. Unfortunately, as well, Russia still have a huge capability on maritime domain. Instead, sanctions, instead failures of first months of this war, they still have a huge capabilities in the Black Sea, in the Sea of Azov, and in the Caspian Sea. That's why we should thinking about strengthening Ukrainian capabilities. First step, as I mentioned above, was implementing of new concept of transformation of the system of military education. But we should think about next steps regarding transformation system of training. And it's a very, very comprehensive and complicated problem. And the core point of this transformation should be a vision of future leader for armed forces of Ukraine, and not only for armed forces, but for defense forces of Ukraine. We're thinking about this new leader because the quality of this person, of future leader, it's a starting point for understanding what system of training and education we need, what challenges we will have with transformation our system, education and training. We should remember that all educational facility on the territory of Ukraine under threats of Russian attacks. It's absolutely another level of understanding or organization of the process of training officers. Very briefly, what kind of leader we need? I would focus your attention on one critical aspect from my personal perspective. We should thinking about will and moral of future leader. Why? Because unfortunately, we have a hugest level of violation of humanitarian law during this warfare. Our leaders should understand the role of human in modern warfare. The most dangerous technology on the battlefield is a human, on the trenches, on the headquarters, and so on and so forth. And our leaders should understand the value of human life as a key criteria of effectiveness of decision-making process. And I think in this case, we faced before unbelievable transformation. Because unfortunately, instead heavy losses, Russians still have ability to replace monthly approximately 25,000 of personnel. They're losing on a daily basis from 500 personnel to 1,000. We're speaking about 1-2 battalion per day. 1-2 battalion per day. And they trying their offensive again and again. This is a core point. This is a problem. This is a threat. Thank you so much.
General Wagner. Also, just to note, there are cards going up and down for questions once the introductory remarks are done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aaron, for having me here today. Thank you very much for everyone being here for this discussion and panel. I would like to start with a few introductory remarks. In our rapidly changing world, the global security environment is evolving across multiple fronts. And our response as the international community have to look particularly in military readiness here, and that means education and training must be consequently equally dynamic. The situation in Ukraine, as you just have heard, has highlighted a critical aspect. It's not only about how we fight, but it's also about how we train while we fight. And this in two aspects. One is the short-term aspects, as today, but there is a long-term aspect for all of us as well. And our training must evolve to become more interoperable, more resilient, more agile, matching the pace of modern operations. Success in this area depends on our ability to quickly gain and utilize data-driven insights. The fast pace of modern warfare demands that the integration of training solution development and delivery aligns with the operational tempo. Inadequate information sharing among allies and partners can significantly impact our mission success. But let's just give you a few insights. As the chair of the Partnership for Peace Consortium, let me share 3 key areas where our efforts are making a tangible difference in the situation of Ukraine and should make a difference in our PMEs as well. Each of them leveraging distributed learning technology in some capacity. But I would like to give you a short glance. What is the Partnership for Peace Consortium? It's a US-German initiative from 1999 to increase the cooperation in security and defense education within NATO and beyond NATO. At the moment, we have 8 stakeholders from the US, ranging from the US to Switzerland, including NATO. Up to 250 academics and service members from almost 100 education and research institutions out of those 8 countries, working in 8 working groups with different topics, reaching from ADL to regional stability discussions in the South Caucasus. But now back to the examples. The first example is perhaps the most pertinent to this panel. The PFP Consortium's US and NATO ACT co-chaired ADL working group is assisting Ukraine in utilizing ADL technology to overcome traditional pre-war training challenges in a very resource-constrained environment. This support addresses critical issues like limited access to learning materials and challenges in digital asset delivery. ADL's role in Ukraine goes beyond technology use. It represents a responsive and precise adaptation to evolving warfare demands. Secondly, a strategic leadership program. Looking forward, the strategic leadership program implemented by Sweden is preparing civilian and military Ukrainian leaders for post-war governance challenges, focusing on strategic decision-making and crisis management. It addresses the need for continued education at the executive level, emphasizing the complexity of global security as well. Understanding the unique challenges Ukraine officials face, much of this program provided using distributed learning technology, as well as hybrid engagement held in countries like Sweden, Poland, or Germany. Lastly, the Defense Education Enhancement Program, DEEP. The DEEP, implemented by NATO and the PFP Consortium, is working with Ukrainians' professional military education organization to align more closely with Western standards and NATO interoperability. DEEP has been instrumental in advancing Ukraine's defense education system since 2014, particularly in shaping the Ukrainian NCO course post-2014, demonstrating the impact of robust defense education. And I'm sure you have read the articles about the consequences out of this Ukrainian NCO core for the war. Moreover, DEEP relied heavily on distributed learning technology in early stages of the war to continue defense education and training in country despite this destruction or partial destruction of several PME organizations. But what are the challenges out of these driven initiatives? The effectiveness of those programs like the ADL working group, like SLP or DEEP in Ukraine is remarkable, particularly given their progression largely to the efforts of 250 highly motivated individual volunteers. So we had in this year more than 100 US academics and service members out of 14 educational and research institutions. In defense education, this trend is notable. Many support efforts for the Ukrainians are propelled by individuals from, as I mentioned, volunteer defense education organizations. This overdependence on individual contributions exposes a significant vulnerability in our current defense education capability building enterprise, a challenge that remains difficult to address even with the most advanced distributed learning solutions. It's imperative that we address this vulnerability by embedding these initiatives deeper within our organizational structures. Embedding interoperable defense education between allies and partners must become a core practice in Western PME organizations. By institutionalizing these initiatives, we can guarantee that our collective defense is resilient, sustainable, agile, and interoperable. Let me come to the conclusion. The conflict in Ukraine underscores the essential role of ongoing training and defense education, highlighting the need for unity and collaboration with allies and partners for a robust collective security strategy. Distributed learning's adaptability and scalability are critical in this complex environment, essential for effective force training and support as we assist Ukraine and prepare for future military challenges. It's important to learn lessons from the recent war instead of only identifying them, to implement those lessons not only in the support of the education and training for the Ukrainian forces, but in our PMEs as well is from utmost importance. However, to maintain our collective operational readiness and global standing, allies must be willing to develop resilient, sustainable, and agile defense education training capabilities at an organization level with the partners. The future requires preparing for these looming threats by strengthening institutional partnerships for knowledge and collective resource sharing, to identify areas where to adopt the new methodology, train while you fight, while in other areas continuing the successful train as you fight. Thank you very much.
Admiral Vasely, thank you.
Thanks very much for the introduction, and thanks very much. It's very proud to be here on behalf of General Anderson, my boss, as the Joint Staff Director, J7, Force Design and Development. You've heard a lot here today about, a lot of the speakers have already talked about the importance of lessons learned as a fundamental aspect and tenet of training. So what do we learn? So I'm going to start up front and propose a question to you all and kind of answer that question myself with some perspective, a little bit provocative about, are we learning as we fight, as we look at what's happening in Ukraine? Do we have the culture and the mindset to be able to actually learn the lessons as opposed to, or are they lessons observed vice lessons learned? And I would argue that there are currently some barriers in place that preclude us from actually learning from what we're doing. That poses a major blind spot and gap, and the need, as you've already heard, in terms of developing that sense of urgency to correct that. So again, there are some fundamental changes, both in process and procedure, but then it's also, more importantly, I think, that changing of the mindset and the culture to want to learn proactively, vice reactively. As Dasdy Baxter alluded to, we do I think we do a decent job of identifying and reacting in a crisis to learning lessons. Look at World War II, bombing of Pearl Harbor, the 9/11 attacks. When you do the after-action reviews, it's why didn't we see these coming? We should have. It was there, but we didn't learn. There wasn't that proactive sense of we have to do something about it. There's a number of factors associated with that. But I think as we look forward in terms of the great power competition, near-peer competitors, I think we can ill afford to allow ourselves to not learn and be more proactive in terms of what we need to be able to do going forward. So coming back to the Ukraine scenario, one of the things that Ukraine is showing us is that it demonstrates how certain battlefield tactics endure. Think trench warfare, mass-on-mass fighting. Technology is driving new ways of thinking about how we fight and how we're executing warfare through the Ukrainian support of our Ukrainian partners. As we think about the lessons learned here, I think exquisite tech alone is not going to solve the problem or is not the game changer. It's the human adaptation and the level of ingenuity is the fundamental principle that drives whether or not we are successful, whether or not we are learning. And the imperative to rapidly translate lessons learned into new tactics, techniques, and procedures, as well as capabilities. And as you've heard Sergey talk about, what the Ukrainians are doing every day with our support is they are learning under the crucible of combat, much like what we and our partners collectively have done over the last 20 years in the CT and the counter-VEO fight. As I said, reactive in terms of learning on the fly because we have a need to based on combat, not because we understand proactively that we need to get after this in a meaningful way. So, what are some of the barriers that preclude us from learning? Number one, I think there are authorities, lack of authority from the owner of the lessons learned database for the joint force on the U.S. side. We have a challenge with gaining a large portion of what combatant commands, services, other elements of the joint force are learning through exercises and training and incorporating that into the database. We can't compel that or incentivize the push to be able to incorporate that. So a lot of that data is held in various stovepipes around the globe. We overclassify information. Our partners, we can't share much of theirs. As I look through that lessons learned database, there is not much there from our partners because of classification issues, self-induced. And again, for the right reasons, probably when we initiated those, but clearly is a detractor and a barrier for us to be able to share those lessons learned across the collective combined force as we look forward. The follow-through. How many times have we done an after-action review based on an exercise and look at it, you identify the list of actions, observations that turn into actions that need to be done, you execute those initial actions, but then because of the 10 or 12 or however many other tasks that you've got from the commander, that's about as far as you go. So the lack of follow-through in terms of being able to determine whether or not those actions or activities actually solve the problem, and then did we share it? Did we transmit that across the joint force to actually learn is lacking. And then finally, coming back really to the piece on mindset and culture, I think there's an overall sense of being afraid to fail or demonstrate failure in training. Meaning, if there's missteps or bad decisions that were made during an exercise, there's a kind of a cultural sense of wanting to hold on to that internally to whatever respective command there is, and not wanting to share, as opposed to how do we best learn? We best learn from others' missteps, mistakes, our own mistakes. So the idea of willingness to be able to fail fast in training, to be able to then take those and share that information out for others to learn as we go forward, I think is one of the key detractors. Some of the things that the J7 we are doing to fix some of the kind of procedural aspects of this under the General Anderson's joint warfighting concept implementation, which talks about the future way of warfighting. Number one is, under the Train the Force LOE is, number one is seeking to improve our assessment process. So not just observations and lessons learned, but completing that cycle of doing the deeper analysis on the actions that are done, assigning accountability to individuals to follow those actions through to determine if they are in fact being, a solution to the problem, and is that information going out and coming full circle. We are incorporating AI, so emerging technologies, to look at the reams of data that are in the system now. How do we make sense of that? How do we aggregate it more quickly and develop and improve our processes and our efficiencies in terms of understanding what is in that data that we have to take away to be able to learn from and then disseminate rapidly to the partners that need to know it. And that goes to the next point, trying to reduce and incorporate and improve our declassification or our classification guidelines so that we can share with our allies and partners more rapidly at the speed of relevance as we go forward. Incorporation, again, of allies and partners in this process is absolutely paramount. So in closing, I will state that we are working to update, the processes, procedures, authorities, to make it easier to share, to incentivize, to reduce those barriers for sharing so that we can actually learn from each other. But in terms of, I think, the fundamental change that really needs to take place in terms of the mindset and the culture is that we must collectively incentivize and reward a willingness to fail fast and learn in training to ultimately change the culture and mindset if we are to succeed in training while fighting. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
General Blitzer, thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks again for the invitation to be here on behalf of the Combined Arms Center at Fort Leavenworth and Training and Doctrine Command at Fort Eustis. It's an honor to be here with you this morning and with this distinguished panel. So my role as the Maneuver Center of Excellence at Fort Moore is I'm responsible for really two big portfolios. One, training and leader development. And that's every new soldier that's going to be an infantry or an Army soldier, every non-commissioned officer that's infantry or armor, every lieutenant before they head out to be a platoon leader for 19 weeks, every captain before they go command a company, and then battalion and brigade commanders come for a pre-command course. So a tremendous responsibility to train our Army's junior and mid-grade leaders, and also allies and partners. And I would say we had a Ukrainian non-commissioned officer recently graduate from Ranger School, and you want to talk about an incredibly motivating individual to everybody else in that course, knowing he was going to be back in combat just a few weeks later. I've also got a role with respect to modernization, or as we like to look at it, as continuous transformation. I'm the force proponent for modernizing infantry and armor formations, brigade and below. And that's not just materiel, that's doctrine, that's how we're organized, that's how we train, and so on and so forth. DOT-MIL-PF, the great acronym that we have, DOT-MIL-PFP. So when we've heard a little bit of discussion and we've talked a little bit about the changing character of war, how the ways and means that we're fighting, we're seeing changing right before us. We're seeing glimpses of it here with the Russian invasion into Ukraine. We're watching what China's doing closely, other adversaries, and we're seeing things change on the battlefield. And one of those big observations is the transparent nature of the battlefield, from small UAS, open source, drones, to open source collection, to your electromagnetic signature. I mean, the last 20 years I haven't had to look up because we've had air superiority, and I haven't had to worry about squeezing my hand mic and knowing that every time I do that, I'm giving away my location. So we're seeing huge impacts of that, this multi-domain nature of the fight, which led us, the Army, to our new doctrine of multi-domain operations and really fighting combined arms in a multi-domain environment. And one thing I've been particularly focused on is having a sense of urgency, what Admiral Vasey was talking about. I mean, shame on me if years from now I didn't do everything I could as a senior leader to make sure the young people that are coming through Fort Moore are as prepared as they can be for combat. Because I worry we're a miscalculation away of something in any of these theaters. Just a year ago, we have a partnership with the Israelis, and I was in Israel. And they were showing me the Gaza Strip and showing me tunnels that Hamas had dug. And now, who would have thought just a year later, what's going on. So we're at a dangerous place, and we've got to have a sense of urgency. And so what things are we doing at Fort Moore at the Maneuver Center? One, there's a mindset shift that has had to happen. The default mindset has had to shift from counterinsurgency to large-scale combat operations. And we realize a lot of our mid-grade non-commissioned officers and officers, all they've experienced is the last 20 years, and it's no fault of anyone. They've done God's work during that period, but this is different. And we had to bring them in and kind of recertify and talk about how this is different and how they need to be instructing differently. Again, additional emphasis on the basics, on marksmanship, on camouflage, on a variety of skills that may have been, we've always focused on marksmanship, but camouflage, just things, nature sustainment, things that when you're looking at large-scale combat operations that we haven't maybe has been focused on. Then the issue of drones and the electromagnetic spectrum. You know, I've went out, we've purchased, every new soldier now gets exposed to this. I want everybody leaving Fort Moore, private to colonel, knowing I got to look up. We've produced a battle drill on react-to-air, both small UAS and loitering munitions. And we're also, how do we employ these things also? We're updating I run the small UAS master trainer course, and it's very important to be adapting from just legally how to fly a system to how do I fight this system? How do I learn from what the Ukrainians are learning, the TTPs are employing? And then all of our folks that are there are learning against the Russian and China order of battle. They need to know that. We need to be back to what I know I experienced as a junior officer. And as well as exposing them to new concepts like data and data literacy and having folks start to think about how to employ data, how to leverage data, probably not our privates, but definitely our officers. And so how do we keep this sense of realism? And I think some of it is you have to go forward a little bit. I know I've been to Security Assistance Group Ukraine. We read prolifically. I've sent a lot of my staff officers forward to teach and instruct because there's an aha moment when you get to dialogue with those that are in the fight and are fighting for their country and seeing what they're facing, not just on social media, but hearing people describe it in a way that makes it much more tangible and, again, and urgent for you. And then as well as, again, reading lessons learned, some from the U.S., but a lot from our allies and partners that are actually really good, and that perspective is very important. But we can't forget the changing character of war. The persistent nature of war remains. Brutal contest of wills. And he touched on this earlier, but I mean, aggressive, inspirational leadership through incredible hardship still matters. At the end of the day, and I've seen slides where they show 3 photos from the Ukraine trenches and what they're fighting, and they show 3 photos from World War I, and it looks a lot the same. And that's scary. And we need our young people to be conditioned and trained in a way to lead through that. And I think a challenge, psychological, toughness and hardness and how you train that is something I'm thinking a lot about. In the end, our advantages, I think, remain the same and have been touched on. Our people are incredibly talented young people that choose to serve, and the innovative and creativity and ideas and commitment. Our non-commissioned officer corps, which I'm tremendously proud of as an Army officer, I think is the envy of many armies around the world. Mid-grade leadership that exercises discipline initiative to get things done. A lot of our adversaries officer-centric, and they look over their shoulder and ask their boss permission to do something before they do it because they want somebody to blame. We don't have that DNA in our leadership. We have folks that want to lead and that talk about where they failed as some of the first things they do. And then lastly, our training. I commanded our combat training center in Europe, the Joint Multinational Readiness Center. I've served at the National Training Center, and I've got a whole bunch of deployments to our training center, Fort Polk, or Fort Johnson. But we train at the threshold of failure. When I was running that training center, I wanted you to almost get it right, but not get it right. I wanted you to taste, to know what you needed to do. And because that's where the optimal learning occurs, as Admiral Vasely talks about. It's at that threshold of failure. So again, we have to train hard. We've got to train. We've got to fail. We've got to use that as a stepping stone to getting better. As we look towards the future, one of my modernization responsibilities is with respect to human-machine interface and robotics, as a proponent, again, for brigade and below. And we're thinking a lot about how to employ those, how do I make first contact and not shed blood, not with humans? How do I employ to to sense, protect, and kill an IV line ahead? How do I ensure our folks gain trust in those systems? And how do I train them? And as you think about train while you fight, a lot of this, and Amo Vasey touched on it, if we were fighting, how would we be rapidly disseminating lessons learned? How would we be learning in real time from failure that others are having? As we design future capabilities, many familiar with IVAS, one of the systems the Army is pushing is the ability to train, rehearse, and fight off the same system. As we think about future vehicular platforms, how do you build into them a training component? So you're not having to go to another trainer. You can train in the same vehicle you're going to fight in. And how do we have a synthetic training environment, a cloud-based training environment where we can, in real time, train forward? Think an American analogy is football, where a quarterback comes off the field, sits on the sideline with a tablet, and is reviewing what happened the previous 3 or 4 downs. How are we able to do that in real time? So again, a lot of great discussion so far, and training and leader development, fundamental to success on the battlefield, and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And we've got a good chunk of time here for questions, and I've got some great questions here for you. I think and a good one to start off with is to the full panel. And the question reads that there's a great deal of discussion and in fact agreement on where we want to go, commitment for interoperable multinational training and education. But if you had a magic wand and could make one thing or eliminate one thing to get us to that goal, what it would be. And I think that there you can think especially about what's that medium-term bottleneck to change. Not necessarily the grand solution to all things or the little thing now, but that bottleneck to medium-term progress. What would be that one thing that you would create or destroy to carry the vision forward? Ms. Baxter?
Oh, man. This is on, ooh.
You're live.
Sure is. 2 things, and one has already been touched on, and that's the data piece. We need to be able to share data with our allies and our partners. We need that then, and that is not just the link between us and an ally and a partner. It's also the links within the services themselves, the links between the services, the Joint Staff, the combatant commands, an interoperability of data. I mean, the Deputy Secretary, 2 years ago now, I think, signed out a memo on data and said that, data is owned by the department. You don't really own your own data. The department owns data. To try to open up the aperture to share and share alike the data for requirements, the data for systems, and be able to have that common baseline. That's something that we in my office are working very hard on, that data piece. That as the foundation then with the authorities, normative and also all the rest of it, to share that data with an ally and a partner. That gets a little bit to the classification thing that has been mentioned on the panel as well, but I'm also really thinking about the ones and zeros of that data, because the second thing is the requirements piece. We need to have a much better understanding of the common gaps we have that can be the quick wins, not easy wins, but quick wins in terms of filling a training capability. If we have a yardstick to measure the distance between our forces, combined coalition forces today, and where we all commonly assess we will need to be in X, Y, or Z years, that's very, very useful to then measuring and monitoring and proving to ourselves we are making progress, but it really does start with requirements. Something that I've been thinking a lot about is when we think about lessons learned, how do we have an ability to translate in real time what we're learning on the battlefield without comms? That needs to generate some sort of requirement to enable some sort of capability to talk, to disseminate things when comms go down. How do you figure that out? That's a TTP. That's a common requirement for that TTP. So I would say those 2 things. That's another reason why we have been working our great partnership with the Joint Staff J7, collaboratively on that in that space, and then collectively with the interagency, with the State Department, with the intel community, to have those conversations, to have a venue to discuss how do you break those barriers down. But it really starts with a common set of data that we can share, and then the common understanding of requirements.
I'll be relatively quick, and I have two as well, but I'll go fast. So I think a common theme I heard from everybody was this question of mindset. And Admiral Vasey, I think, got it spot on, and this kind of fear of failure mentality. He didn't say this, but complacency. If I had a magic wand and I'm not asking everybody to run around in a state of terror, but I would be happier to see people with a greater sense of urgency and less complacency and sort of satisfaction with where we are, because I don't think we're in a terribly good place, and I don't think there's great recognition of that. So if I were able to change people's mindsets on that, I would be happy. The other thing is that I would like to, because I think we can be enormously creative, and we can do a lot if we're motivated to do it. But I can't teach motivation, I can't teach passion, right? The second thing is, I would like to see our security cooperation professionals focused on really integrating deeply with our allies and partners in a way that we've really never done, in an unprecedented way. And it's about sharing information and reducing overclassification, but it's really about delivering capabilities at readiness to our partners. For too long, we've been focused on delivering programs and engaging in processes rather than providing capabilities at readiness and then working together with them to ensure that if we're assuming a capability exists, it does. So that's it, thanks.
Okay. As for us, the problem of changing our mental model and our mindset is pretty important. And this is a very complicated problem for Ukraine, which we're trying to solve right now during this war. Unfortunately, we have a lot of multi-layers problem, and from another hand, this is a good time to find good solution how to decide this problem. I would say yes, maybe it would be correct to say about more short perspective. For example, 2027, Russia trying to rescale this war as a war of attrition, and we should thinking about a more close perspective, for example, a perspective to 2027, including development of our capabilities. Of course, these capabilities should be based on utilization of Western experience, Western equipment, and Western weapon. And we should understand that this utilization should be a basis of our future force structure. The huge discussion we have right now in our society regarding future force structure, and this is a very comprehensive problem too. But if we will speak in regarding the system of education and training and some points which I wish change right now, I think we should thinking about speed of implementation of lessons, including our common lessons, which we have on the basis of our common activities. And the second one, we should thinking about resilience of system of training and education in the conditions of war of attrition. Because right now we have a huge problems, even in Europe, with training facility, with protection of training facility. We have a huge problem with reconstitution of our brigades, a reconstitution. This war, as far, will be 2 years of this war. 2 years. That's why it's main points.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I have one wish I would like to go away, and one I would like to add on to the capabilities. The first thing, coming out of Germany, I thought we have a bureaucracy which is pretty big. But I have learned, stationed in different NATO countries and NATO organizations, bureaucracy, it's a game changer. And everybody, or a lot of people, try to hide bureaucracy, administration, whatsoever, and have this as an excuse. So I would like to have a lot of less administrative restrictions, challenges, and whatsoever in a lot of areas. So this would be one of my wish which I would like to get rid of. And the other, it's a capability to find the right women and men to join the forces. Because I think that's one of our biggest challenges for the future, is to find the right future leaders. And we have to find a way, we have to find the capability to attract the young, bright women and men to join the forces of all our nations. So those are my two wishes. Thank you.
I have 2 points. First is, I think we've got to create opportunities to partner, to build relationships, because relationships matter. As you look at the last 20 years, the relationships we built with both allies and partners, and then on the U.S. side with our interagency partners and others, intergovernmental partners, was critical to the success that we were able to achieve. And my fear going forward is the further we get away from combat, the more we will lose those relationships. So it is absolutely critical that we develop new relationships, new partnerships, and look for those opportunities to be able to create that going forward, because that is something our adversaries do not have, is reliable partnerships and relationships and alliances. That is our ultimate strength in competition, deterrence, and ultimately in combat. And the second is, going back to my point on changing the mindset, is incentivize leadership, incentivizing appropriate risk-taking during training, to build trust and confidence in our future leaders, to take those risks, to know that they're able to fail fast and learn without risk of, we're not a zero defect military, but making sure that our young leaders understand that they can take those risks going forward is critically important if we're going to retain that trust and confidence over the years. Thanks.
Okay, a lot of great points already made. I think I'd double down on the interoperability one. I think very important, not just even from a lessons learned standpoint, but I think we've still got work to do from a fighting together interoperable, and work on the United States side and work on our allies and partners side across the human, procedural, and technical. And the relationships part of that is so important. And as Admiral Vasely spoke to, I know a mentor of mine shared a saying with me: you want to solve a difficult problem, you put 5 friends in the room, because they trust one another and they'll assume risk. And the more opportunities we have to develop trust with allies and partners makes us stronger collectively. And if you want to fail, you put 5 strangers in a room. Take a little time to build the trust. The one point I would just say that I think we really need is speed. And it's hard to maybe move from an observation to a lesson learned, but having a mechanism to do that fairly rapidly, and then how do I rapidly change a program of instruction in the same manner off of a clearly defined lesson. I'm able to do some stuff relatively quickly because it's the nature of the operating environment, UAS, appreciating the electromagnetic spectrum, things like that. But exactly when you're, changing a certain weak program of instruction, we probably, don't entirely have the agility we wish we had in that. So those would be my points.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to draw on one of the questions here and pull in a thread that Admiral Vasely pointed out in terms of the imperative to create opportunities for partnership. So as we think about all the actors and stakeholders, we're talking about pulling together partners and allies, training, experimentation, education, and industry. Those are oftentimes pretty siloed actors, talking about learning across the scope of education, training, exercises, and evaluation. Right? So how do you see, or what operationalize for me a bit, how it is that we create those opportunities for partnerships, that we begin to create that global integrating imperative across the communities by way of partnership opportunities. What does that look like?
I have to go first every time?
We'll start with,
No, I'll start.
No,
Let's do,
Hey.
you know, the pinging. All right.
yes, ma'am, you do.
Sweet. The thing that occurs to me is actually piggybacking off of what General Buzzard ended with, which was speed and the tension, and these are my words and not his, but how do you continually refresh things that have been created to be relatively stolid? Meaning, you know, the professional military education recreates itself roughly every year, every 2 years. There's a special area of emphasis, which we don't have to get into, but there are mechanisms to inject new content into the curriculum. Something that my office has been thinking through is when we have something, and I swear I'm getting to the point, when we have a piece of content that is new and kind of hitting us amidships a bit, do we have to wait for the next wicket of, you know, when that window is open, by which point that content is a little bit stale? Or can we enhance and improve and change the curriculum at the speed of, relevant at the speed of change itself? So when it gets to the question about creating opportunities, my mind goes to things like experiential learning, so things like war games, things like tabletop exercises that can bring allies and partners, Five Eyes, whoever, together in an unclassified environment to build relationships, to build a sense of teamsmanship, to share perspectives, commiserate that sense of urgency that has been mentioned on the panel a lot. Anything that picks people up out of the structures that we all fight through, as General Wagner said, with the bureaucracy, he would like to wave away with the magic wand, and I agree, though I am a product of that bureaucracy, I recognize. Anything that punctures that and provides an additional opportunity outside of those structures, I think is something to seize. And I know that throughout the education system, there have been war games used for this purpose, certainly through international military education. I would go further than that. I would not harness it around military education. I would do some sort of education, training, exercise, experimentation hybrid. And I hope the next question is not to ask me to elucidate what that would mean. But something that doesn't even acknowledge, you know, this is an education game. No, this is a little bit broader than even that. I think that would be extremely useful. Anything that provides an opportunity, the 5 strangers in the room who then leave the room as 5 friends would be part of the goal, having that as the opportunity.
Thank you. Go
Should you
for
be
it.
asking this to the Admiral? I'm sorry.
Yeah. If,
I'll go ahead and pass to him.
okay, Admiral?
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, and we are working very closely with DASD Baxter's team, you know, on this effort. I would offer, you know, in order, why, you know, I always ask the why should we, you know, do a lot of disparate entities, you know, what's the reason we need to collaborate, right? One is the threat, you know, so but beyond that, you know, what is it that allows us to basically coalesce around that? And I think a big part of it is this concept that, the joint warfighting concept that General that I alluded to in my opening comments in terms of a new way of thinking about how we are going to compete and ultimately potentially fight against the, you know, the adversary from a global perspective as opposed to, because that's one of the challenges that I think we see in the current paradigm is, and what we've done over the past several decades is we still think regionally, we act, we exercise, we focus on regional threats and fights as opposed to understanding how, you know, near-peer competitors are going to be looking at things through a global lens. So I think, you know, aligning ourselves to a concept that allows us to incorporate all of those different elements of wargaming, experimentation, training, and exercises and experimentation is I think one way is a means to be able to do that we are working to develop that. And there are some other efforts. So as we work to declassify that to levels that we can share, then understanding, I think, it's not just a U.S. concept, hey, we want you to do this because this is what, to fill this gap. The approach, I think, is provide that construct or that concept and then ask the question, how do you see yourself fitting into this? Does your priorities, your focus, do your concerns with regards to the threats align with what we are proposing as part of this concept? And then how would you see yourself fitting in, I think, is the approach that we need to take as we go forward. Because one of the things I think that the, particularly allies and partners have is that access and placement globally in different areas where, the U.S. does not, where we don't, or we are not best suited politically or otherwise to participate. It's understanding how we incorporate those different strengths to fill in gaps that we see. But I think, again, going back to the point of coalescing around a concept, threat-based, threat-focused, but a concept that we can align to that allows us to incorporate all those elements. Thanks.
General Bush.
If I could just add on that, I think just two things. One is a mindset that this is important, that these observations that become lessons are really important, and we need to be monitoring and looking for this and seeking it and seeking to adapt and change is the character of war changing. And the key of that Admiral Vasey touched on is the access. What I've tried to do with our folks is get over to, where we're training Ukrainian forces, whether it's U.S. or whether it's our allies or partners, and hear what they're seeing and understanding. It sounds like a simple thing, but I remember one of the sites, they were asking to be kind of conditioned to being around heavy vehicles. We want to be in a trench when a tank drives over it. There's some fear that comes with that. We used to do that in our training at now Fort Moore. And we're thinking about how do we bring that back. When I was a lieutenant, I went out into a bunker and we dropped high-angle artillery almost on top of you, and that was to kind of condition you to what that looked like. And oh my God, if I'm in that, I'm digging or I'm moving really damn fast. Right now there's like a tree going through that bunker because we haven't used it for 20 years. And so I'm looking at how do I and how do we pull, again, small UAS, how do I watch, we're observing on Twitter, you're watching a war unfold. I remember sharing a feed of Ukrainians were very wisely using small UAS to orient, similar to a Mark 19, a grenade launcher, to orient the fires onto the beaten zone. I said, hey, how come we're not doing that? And like 3 days later, they'd add it into the curriculum. How do we use it to orient our mortar fire? There's a lot of things but we got to have a mindset that is wanting to learn and wanting to realizing that this is opportunity. Shame on us if we don't learn from it.
General Wagner.
I would like for 2 minutes to put on my second hat as the Deputy Director of the Marshall Center next to the PFPC, and would like to come back to the 5 friends in the room. That's one of the examples how you can improve this. We have 16,000 alumni in the Marshall Center at the moment, mostly European and Eastern Europeans. And we have 6 persons who are full-time job just handling the alumni. We are running 30 events each year in the capitals to bring back together alumni out of those countries and others who are right now stationed in this country to keep this increase and keep this group of friends relevant and knowledge to each other. And with this, and I think lots of us are internationally trained, having been at courses in the US or in Europe, and continuing this friendship and continuing this cooperation in an alumni process, I think it's value to look a little bit more at this. Thank you.
Dr. Kravencha.
A very quick point. I just wanted to emphasize to Admiral Vasey's point that there is tons of historical precedent for this, right? We used to plan together. We did that. And if anybody is interested in an excellent book recommendation that is obscure for no good reason, if you read Cossack, it's C-O-S-S-A-C, Lieutenant General Sir Frederick Morgan and the Genesis of Operation Overlord. It's a fascinating study in how an alliance created a plan that worked. And how actually difficult that was, but how the fundamental trust and patterns of working together really served their purposes. And in fact, you can look in the post-war, and the British and the US were still planning operations together because they thought that there was going to be a Soviet offensive through Turkey into the Middle East. I have the microfilm if you'd like to see it. It's fascinating. These habits used to exist. We used to do this. We've just sort of fallen out of the habit of doing some of these things.
General Sokotson.
I think such new level of cooperation should be developed on the basis of learning lessons. But we will not focus our attention only on the military aspect of lessons. I think we should speak about whole spectrum of instruments of power, about diplomacy, information, finance, economy, intelligence. It's a broad spectrum of problems which we have. And I believe due to some weeks, maybe months, we will have some new projects under the umbrella of European Union and NATO, I believe, and NATO too. More tangible element for coordination, cooperation, analysis, training, education under NATO umbrella. Such work has started at NATO, and we discuss sometimes this project during NATO-Ukraine Council on all levels, and I believe we will have such tangible results.
Thank you. So I'd like to ask a similar question in a different way, focusing on another common thread that we heard here, and that's the challenge that we all face nationally and together in terms of transforming the culture of our soldiers and officers to be ready to win through intellect, to be ready to manage, leverage even uncertainty, to be more trusting and risk tolerant. That's within the nation, but I think especially as we're talking partners and allies, to build that kind of culture and that trust and readiness for innovation and creativity as a partnership and as an alliance. What can we do now to begin to build that more agile, adaptable model?
All right, after being a pill, I'll start this time. So I think there's two things. One, some of this transformation, I think, is outside of our control, keeping in mind that those who come to us through the doors of OCS, OTS, or through the service academies, are themselves a product of American public education systems or private education systems that have shaped how they think already to some degree. So their brains are to some extent kind of fully already baked, which means that we have to now reorient them towards a certain particular mindset, and not just the ethical profession of arms, but a very particular kind of creative and courageous thinking in order to be the kind of lethal warfighter that we need them to be when it counts. A lot of that, I think, is going to be part of this concomitant shift that we're seeing in military education right now, away from assessing the return on investment of education as a product of what you put into it, as opposed to a product of what you get out of it, the shift towards outcomes-based military education. And here we're assessing what it is that I now know how to do, as a product of how I think and how I act, and not just the up or down vote on a test or a paper or you passed a course. But here's, no kidding, what education has produced in terms of what I now am able to contribute to an organization, to a company, to a what have you. Building that out is something that we're working alongside the Joint Staff J7 on, which has been great. We're kicking that off throughout all of military education. And building out what the shift of military education in that dimension means in terms of the focus being a little bit less on the content of, we need you to understand X, Y, and Z about the adversary. That is still important. However, the adversary is always going to shift. It's more, what do you do with information? And it really is, and I know this is a real focus of the Service Academy specifically, creating people of character. It takes character to fail in public. It takes character to take a lesson and then, to Admiral Vaisley's point, then do something with that lesson. That is going to have to continue to take ever more space, both actual space and time during the times in the classroom, but space in your brain. about my purpose here is to absorb information and run as fast as I can, and if I fail, I fail, and now I'm going to do X, Y, and Z with it, and then plug that lesson back in. Doing that then at scale gets us to the ultimate vision that I demonstrated or try to demonstrate in my opening remarks about training while we fight, integrating lessons as you fight on the battlefield. That starts in the classroom. That doesn't start when you get downrange. It doesn't even start when you're preparing to deploy. That starts when you're 18, 19, 20, 21, and older than that. So we need to bake that into the pedagogy, into the methodology of military education writ large, in order such that when they leave those schoolhouses, including the experiential learning that we provide, they have those kind of cognitive reps and sets of, I now know what it feels like to fail, to just absolutely bite it in public, in front of my friends, some of whom are going to be my future bosses, in front of my professors, in front of my commanding officer. And I lived and I learned and I'm better for it. That is also going to, I think, require a little bit of a leadership change from those that are currently teaching now and in the schoolhouse to demonstrate what that is like. And that's going to be part of the solution as well.
Very, very quickly, I want to say that everything Carolyn just said is exactly right and should apply to civilians as well. We have massively underinvested in civilians in DOD and in the interagency. And it's actually quite shameful if you look at how we used to approach policymaking and teaching policymaking and the way we've done it over the last couple of decades. And a little bit sorry if you attended some of these grand strategy programs. So great, you can develop exquisite strategies that are totally unexecutable in the real world. Congratulations. So we've become enamored with ideas, and ideas that can't be executed don't matter. And so I fear that we have raised a generation of civilians that actually don't have the mindset of ideas are nice, but can it be done? And who understand what it takes to actually develop an executable strategy. That, I think, is really a gap.
And I'm going to jump in really, really fast and just piggyback of what you just said, because everything that Celeste just said is absolutely true. This is going really well. I read somewhere, I would love to take this as mine, but I'm not smart enough to come up with this line. Bureaucratic courage is state capacity, which I think is the most shockingly accurate, pithy statement I have read in a really long time, that bureaucratic courage is state capacity. And that gets to exactly what Celeste just said, that reinvesting in growing the civilian leaders, civilian control of the military, civilian leaders that understand how to generate a strategy that you can execute, and also how, going back to the original question, how to fail and deal with it and learn. That is foundational to being a good leader. My staff will tell you, I fail all the time. I try not to fail all the time. But that demonstration of character and demonstrating what that means, if you don't have that, everything I just said about the schoolhouse is all for naught. They're going to try to get to that level. They're going to try to get to what we need them to be. But if they don't have the leadership, civilian and military, but civilian leadership, to accept that and demonstrate that as well, then we're kind of out of sauce.
I will give the floor to General Buzzard, and then I want to move to closing remarks for everyone. Yeah?
Okay, I agree with everything they said. But I would just a couple things to add. I do think, for me, as I look at particularly our junior officers and soldiers, you have to build a foundation where they're brilliant at the basics, where they know what they should be doing. And when you're really good, that then allows you to pivot and be adaptable, because you've got this foundation established. So you establish that, but then you've got to train conditions where you force adaptability. You force people to be comfortable in friction, in complexity. And we're going to lose leaders on the battlefield. We have to do that in training. We used to do it. We do it a little bit now. But they've got to be comfortable leading through that. And I'm sure Admiral Vasey, same as me, as I think about my time in service and my deployments, I probably never actually executed anything that was my primary training mission. I went and did all kinds of other things because I had this great foundation from which I could adapt to. Secondly, I want to double down as a former Commandant of Cadets at the United States Military Academy. The formative piece at all of our academies, the formative, part of the mission statement is develop leaders of character. And character encompasses all your values, everything from integrity to personal courage to moral courage, which a lot of times is one of the hardest aspects to have. And I know on the academic side, and even for those portions of the curriculum that I had responsibility for, we were trying to teach our young folks not what to think, but how to think, and to kind of build that critical thinking piece into this so they, again, as they get out into the force, they have that capacity. And lastly, I would just say, as we think about training and allies and partners, I think something we can do better is making sure our simulations, our training capabilities account for our allies and partners, but also account for the changing operating environment. It's hard right now to replicate a lot of what's going on overseas or could occur in these simulations for those in industry and others responsible for that. I mean, that's just something that, you know, we can do a great warfighter exercise, as we call them, for our division and corps level, but if it really doesn't replicate the operating environment, we're not getting the most out of it. Thanks.
Thank you. I want to move, we're running out of time. As we move through closing remarks, just try to keep it to about a minute each. But I would encourage you as well. We've got a packed room of excited and interested folks of all stripes. They want to know what they should do next. As they leave this room, what should be on the top of their list to get done? How can they help make this vision happen?
Want me to start from this
Go
end?
for it.
I'll just say, I'll just be brief. I just think this is a really critical inflection point in history, and I think this was touched on earlier, and I would just say we've got to have this same sense of urgency, and we've got to get accustomed to 80% is good enough, and particularly when it comes to training and adapting and just you know, Azure, whether it's supporting this or developing something to help with it or whatever, the quicker, the more relevant, and not shooting for perfect with everything is really what we need. We want to be back to this idea of spiral development, whether it's with a material solution or it's with a training capability or whatever. We get something out there that's, and that's part of the culture we've got to change on, probably on our side too, is what we're asking for, but just to reinforce that sense of urgency.
Bottom line, have the courage to change. Have the courage to change the status quo. If you're a leader, lead. Don't be afraid of challenging that status quo, given that sense of urgency that has been said over and over up here today. We don't have we are out of time in terms of preparing to compete and ultimately deter and win if necessary. So have that courage to change in this time, take advantage of the opportunity to do that. That will demonstrate and really, I think, incentivize and inspire those that work for you when they see that you're willing to take that risk as we go forward, because it's the right thing to do as we go forward, and it's absolutely necessary. Thanks.
Thank you. General Wagner?
I think I would encourage you to put enough value in education, in the interagency and international environment. So highlighting in this education critical thinking, character building, Auftragstaktik, freedom of thinking, and trust. And value those who are in this system and have taken these education, and support them in all efforts. Thank you.
General Selkison, I want to skip you and give you the final words. So, Dr. Gventer.
I agree with everything that was just said, and I would just add, be bold, be innovative, be pushy. It's okay, we can't afford to wait. So keep pushing us who are in the government and who are trying to make sure these things happen. And last point, I will just say, I think everybody knows that in the 20s and 30s, the U.S. have totally underinvested in the Army, and somehow the Army managed to prevail in the Second World War. And Lawton Collins said that the Army War College saved the Army. It was an educational institution that fundamentally gave them the brain power they needed to prevail. So it just illustrates, even though sometimes people find education and training boring, or it seems to take too long, or it's too much investment, it's critical to success in the long term. So thank you.
4 points. The first thing, if we're going to go back to the training while we fight narrative, first thing we're going to need, clarity of thought, courage of initiative, and creativity of plans. Second, we need to dispense with the fallacy that we need perfection. We don't. I want to echo General Buzzard's point that sometimes 80% is good enough. I think we need to become rapidly more comfortable with even less than 80, maybe more like 50. We need to take on board the idea that we're just going to have to innovate in real time and do things on the fly. Third, flexibility and creativity are our watchwords. And fourth, that change without vision drills downwards, and we need to move forwards. So we need to have that vision, and that's where you come in. Keeping us honest on what it is that we think we're saying. Sometimes, to Celeste's point, all of us galaxy brains that went to big think strategy centers came out thinking we're really, really smart, and we know what we're talking about, and we write things that make absolutely no sense. If you think we wrote something that makes absolutely no sense, tell us. And I think that would actually be very, very useful. We don't often get a chance to look ourselves in the mirror, and we need to do that a lot more often, going back to bureaucratic courage being state capacity. So, thank you.
Thank you. General Sakutson.
From my perspective, I would say that Putin trying right now to present this war for internal Russian population as a war for values. It's some kind battle between Russian values, Russian typical or Russian traditional values, and Western values. But as for me, we have only one correct or right values, all human values. In a case with our system of military education and training, right now we should fight in for Western values in our system of education. This is pretty important because on a battlefield we can observe the fighting between two model of military culture, military art. It's a Soviet or post-Soviet style or fashion of warfare, and partially Western type of modern warfare. That's why I think we should utilize Western approach. It's a very broad spectrum of problems for our system of education and training. It's not only technical adaptation of doctrinal documents. We have improved hundreds of various techniques, NATO standards, but it's not a list of criteria. It's another way of thinking. It's another mental understanding of nature of these documents. That's why in the process of implementation of doctrinal documents and standards, we should speaking about deep implementation of military art and military culture. This is a problem number one for our armed forces, and this is one of the core problem in the process of transformation of the system of education and training. In this picture, in this posture, the leadership as a nature of values playing a key role, as for me. We have started studying leadership as a, not as an idea, but as a way of thinking, as a real nature of future leader only 5, maybe 6 years ago, only. But the very clear example how we have utilized main principles, for example, of mission command from the beginning of this war. It's a clear evidence of valuable approach of leadership as a way of thinking, as a mental model, as a type of moral will, and so on and so forth. That's why we should do it. And I would say a few words regarding support. We have spoke about training, education, about various parts of support, but I would say again, we should more and more weapon and equipment. Unfortunately, this is pretty important too. We have a very, very long list of urgent needs, starting from heavy weapon, air defense, and so on and so forth. We're ready to study. We're ready to use various types of platform from various partners. Right now, we're using 10 various platforms from Europe, from United States, and so on and so forth. And we're ready to do it. We're ready to do it because we need more huge support for defeat this disaster. Thanks a lot for support.
Thank you very much. This concludes the panel. I'm sure a few of you will stay around a little bit if there are other questions from the audience, but thank you very much for coming.